The gym bag shouldn't have been there, sitting innocently by our bedroom door like it belonged. Mike had left for his Phoenix business trip that morning, kissing me goodbye at 6 a.m., with his usual promise to call when he landed. But here was his black Nike bag, the one he never traveled without, the one that held his protein powder and workout clothes and all the other essentials he claimed to need for his hotel gym sessions. I stared at it for a long moment, coffee mug growing cold in my hands, trying to process what this meant. Mike Martinez, my husband of 8 years, was meticulous about his travel routine. He packed the night before, double-checked his flight times, and never ever forgot his gym bag. In all our years together, through dozens of business trips to cities across the Southwest, this had never happened. My name is Jessica Martinez, though everyone calls me Jess, and I thought I knew my husband better than anyone. At 38, I'd built a comfortable life in our Cedar Park neighborhood, managing marketing campaigns for TechFlow Agency downtown, while Mike traveled for regional sales solutions. We had 2 beautiful children, Sophia, 12, and Ryan, 9, and what I believed was a solid marriage built on trust and shared dreams. Our 2-story house in the Maple Ridge subdivision felt like a sanctuary, complete with Ryan's soccer trophies lining the mantel and Sophia's artwork covering the refrigerator. But standing there that Friday evening, staring at the forgotten gym bag, something cold settled in my stomach. Mike never made mistakes like this. Never. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn air in Austin still held summer's warmth, even as October painted the neighborhood trees in shades of gold and amber. I'd just returned from picking up the kids from school, and they were already settled in the living room with homework and after-school snacks. Sophia had her algebra spread across the coffee table, her dark hair falling in waves around her face as she concentrated, while Ryan practiced spelling words aloud from his spot on the carpet. Normal Friday afternoon sounds filled our home, the kind of peaceful domestic rhythm I'd come to treasure. That's when I noticed the bag. Mike had been unusually stressed lately, taking phone calls at odd hours and spending more time in his home office with the door closed. When I'd asked about it, he'd blamed increased pressure from his regional manager, mentioned some big accounts that needed extra attention. His territory covered Arizona, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and Nevada, requiring frequent travel that had intensified over the past year. 3 trips a month had become the norm, sometimes 4, each lasting 3 to 5 days. I'd learned to manage our family life around his schedule, coordinating kids' activities and household responsibilities during his absences. It wasn't easy, but Mike's commission-based salary allowed me to work part-time hours at the marketing agency, giving me flexibility to be present for Sophia and Ryan. We'd found our groove, or so I thought. Now, as I bent down to move the gym bag from the bedroom doorway, its weight surprised me, heavier than it should be for just workout clothes and protein supplements. The zipper was slightly open, revealing a corner of black fabric that looked different from Mike's usual athletic wear. Curiosity overrode my normal respect for his privacy, and I found myself unzipping the bag wider. Inside, beneath his familiar gray workout shorts and Austin Marathon t-shirt, something gleamed. Metal and glass, rectangular and sleek. Another phone. My breath caught in my throat as I lifted it out, turning it over in my hands. It was newer than Mike's regular iPhone, a different model entirely, with a black case I'd never seen before. The screen was dark, but as I held it, it suddenly lit up with an incoming text notification. Missing you already, honey. Can't wait for you to come home Sunday. Love you so much. Ashley, red heart. The words blurred as I read them again, then a third time, my mind struggling to process their meaning. Ashley. Who was Ashley? Mike had never mentioned an Ashley in any of his work stories, never brought up a client or colleague by that name. And the message was personal, intimate, signed with a heart emoji, and the kind of endearment Mike used with me. My hands began to shake as I stared at the phone, watching the notification fade from the screen. Without thinking, I pressed the home button, and the device unlocked without requiring a passcode. The wallpaper that appeared made my knees buckle. It was a wedding photo. Mike in a black tuxedo, standing beside a petite blonde woman in an elegant white dress. They were cutting a cake together, his hand over hers on the knife, both of them beaming at the camera with pure joy. The woman looked radiant, her smile genuine and full of love as she gazed up at my husband. But it wasn't our wedding photo. This woman wasn't me. I sank onto the edge of our bed, the phone trembling in my grip as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The photo was professionally taken, clearly from an actual wedding ceremony. The backgrounds showed what looked like a chapel or church, with flowers and decorations that spoke of careful planning and significant expense. This wasn't some random image Mike had downloaded or a joke photo from a friend. This was real. With mounting dread, I began exploring the phone, my fingers moving automatically while my mind reeled. The messaging app showed recent conversations with Ashley, but also with other names that made my stomach clench. Rachel in Denver, Nicole in Portland, Amanda in Seattle, Sam in Las Vegas. All of them sending messages that were far too personal, too intimate for business contacts. Safe travels, my love. Text me when you land in Austin. Rachel. Already planning your next visit. I made dinner reservations at that place you liked. Nicole. The kids are asking when Daddy Mike is coming home again. Amanda. Each message was a knife twist, confirming suspicions I hadn't even known I harbored. The phone contained an entire secret life, complete with multiple relationships and what appeared to be ongoing emotional connections with women scattered across Mike's supposed sales territory. But it was the photos that destroyed any remaining hope for innocent explanations. I scrolled through the camera roll with numb fingers, finding image after image that documented a life I knew nothing about. Wedding photos with different women, all featuring Mike in various tuxedos and suits. Vacation pictures showing him on beaches and ski slopes with companions who weren't me. Family portraits with children who weren't Sophia and Ryan, all of them calling him Dad in the captions. One photo stopped me cold. Mike and the blonde woman from the first wedding picture, Ashley, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. She was holding a key, and Mike had his arm around her shoulders. The caption read, "Our new home. Finally ready to start this adventure together. Love you, Mrs. Martinez." Mrs. Martinez. The name I'd proudly taken 8 years ago, thinking I was the only woman who would ever bear it. The identity I'd built my entire adult life around was apparently shared with multiple other women, each believing themselves to be Mike's one and only wife. My coffee mug slipped from my other hand, shattering against the hardwood floor and sending ceramic shards skittering under the dresser. The sound brought me back to the present moment, to the reality of sitting in my bedroom holding evidence of my husband's systematic betrayal. But this wasn't just an affair or even multiple affairs. This was something far more elaborate, more calculated, more devastating. This looked like bigamy. The word formed in my mind slowly, carrying implications I could barely comprehend. Multiple marriages, multiple wives, multiple families, all connected by the same man who kissed me goodbye every morning and called me his soulmate. The man who'd held my hand during both of my pregnancies, who'd coached Ryan's Little League team last summer, who'd danced with Sophia at the father-daughter school function just last month. How many other daughters had he danced with? How many other wives had he kissed goodbye? I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly powered down the phone, shoving it back into the gym bag just as Sophia appeared in the doorway. "Mom, are you okay?" I heard something break. "Just dropped my mug, sweetheart," I managed, forcing my voice to sound normal despite the chaos erupting inside my chest. "Be careful of the pieces while I clean this up." She nodded and disappeared back downstairs, her footsteps fading as she returned to her homework. I stood on shaking legs and went to the bathroom for a towel and dustpan, grateful for the simple task of cleaning up broken ceramic. It gave my hands something to do while my mind spun wildly, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. As I knelt on the floor collecting fragments, each sharp piece felt like a metaphor for my shattered understanding of my marriage. 8 years of shared memories, of building a life together, of believing in promises that were apparently meaningless. Every business trip took on new meaning now. every late-night phone call, every time he'd claimed to be too tired to discuss his day when he returned home. How long had this been going on? How many other women were there? Were Ashley, Rachel, Nicole, Amanda, and Sam all wives? Or just girlfriends? Did they know about each other? Or was each living in the same bubble of ignorance I'd inhabited until 20 minutes ago? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them, each one opening new avenues of doubt and suspicion. Our joint bank account suddenly seemed suspicious. Mike always handled his own business expenses, maintaining a separate account for travel costs that he claimed his company reimbursed. I'd never questioned it, trusting his explanation that it simplified tax preparations and kept business expenses separate from household finances. Now I wondered what else that account funded. Were there other households? Other mortgages? Other children's soccer uniforms and school supplies? I finished cleaning the floor and sat back on my heels, staring at the gym bag that had become a Pandora's box of horrors. The smart thing would be to leave it alone, to pretend I'd never seen the phone, to wait for Mike to return from Phoenix, and continue living in blissful ignorance. The practical part of my mind whispered that some truths were too devastating to pursue, that knowing might destroy not just my marriage but my children's sense of security. But the stronger part of me, the part that had built a successful marketing career on attention to detail and thorough research, knew there was no going back. I couldn't unknow what I'd learned, couldn't pretend those photos and messages didn't exist. If Mike was living multiple lives, if he was married to other women, then everything about our life together was built on lies. And if that was true, then I needed to know the full extent of those lies. I retrieved the phone from the gym bag, my hands steadier now despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Whatever I was about to discover would change everything, would alter the course of my life and my children's lives in ways I couldn't predict. But living in a lie seemed worse than facing an ugly truth, no matter how painful. The phone's screen lit up again as I held it, revealing another incoming message that made my blood run cold. Honey, your dad called looking for you. I told him you were on a business trip but would be home Sunday. Should I tell him to try your other number instead? Love you, Ashley. Other number. The phone I was holding was apparently Mike's secondary device. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Which meant he'd been maintaining completely separate communication channels for his different lives. How sophisticated was this deception? How many phones did he carry? How many identities did he maintain? I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale slowly. Downstairs, I could hear Ryan practicing his spelling words aloud, his young voice confident as he worked through his weekly list. Normal family sounds continued around me while I sat in the epicenter of a revelation that would destroy everything they took for granted. The weight of protecting them, of figuring out how to handle this discovery without traumatizing two innocent children, settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. They adored their father, looked forward to his returns from business trips, bragged about him to their friends. How could I explain that the man they idolized might be a criminal? That their family might be built on foundations of fraud and betrayal? I forced myself to focus on the immediate problem, learning the truth. Everything else, the legal implications, the emotional consequences, the practical challenges of potentially single parenthood, could wait. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The phone in my hands held more secrets than I'd yet uncovered, and despite the terror coursing through my veins, I knew I had to keep digging. Mike wouldn't return until Sunday evening, giving me the entire weekend to investigate before confronting him with what I'd found. Whatever truths awaited in that device, whatever additional horrors might be revealed, I owed it to myself and my children to uncover them all. We deserved to know who we'd been living with, who we'd trusted with our hearts and futures. Taking a deep breath, I opened the phone's photo gallery and began scrolling through 8 years of lies, preparing myself for whatever other revelations awaited in the digital record of my husband's secret lives. The photo gallery contained 3 years of documented lies, each image a window into relationships I never knew existed. My hands moved automatically, scrolling through vacation pictures from places Mike had supposedly visited for work conferences. There he was on a ski slope in Aspen with Rachel, both of them bundled in matching winter coats, her arms wrapped around his waist as they smiled at the camera. Another showed him at what appeared to be a graduation ceremony, his arm around Nicole as she held a diploma, pride radiating from both their faces. But it was the children's photos that broke something fundamental inside me. Birthday parties where Mike wore a World's Greatest Dad t-shirt, while helping kids I'd never seen blow out candles. Little League games where he cheered from the sidelines for boys who weren't Ryan. Dance recitals featuring girls in tutus who called him Daddy in the captions. Girls who weren't Sophia. Each image forced me to recalculate years of memories, moments I'd treasured as uniquely ours now revealed, as performances repeated across multiple stages. The weekend he'd claimed to attend a sales conference in Denver coincided with photos of him helping Rachel move into a new apartment. The Phoenix trip where he'd sent me a picture of his hotel room had actually been spent at what appeared to be Ashley's birthday celebration, complete with extended family members I'd never met. The timestamps on the photos created a horrifying timeline. The earliest images with Ashley dated back 12 years, predating our marriage by 4 years. Wedding photos with her showed a ceremony that had taken place just months before Mike and I had started dating. While I'd believed I was falling in love with a bachelor ready to settle down, he'd already been living as a married man in Arizona. Rachel's wedding photos carried dates from 10 years ago, 2 years before Mike and I had exchanged our own vows. Nicole's ceremony had occurred 7 years ago, just 1 year into our marriage, during a period when Mike had claimed to be establishing new client relationships on the West Coast. Amanda's wedding pictures were dated 6 years ago, the same month I'd given birth to Sophia. While I'd been in labor with our daughter, Mike had apparently been exchanging vows with another woman in Seattle. The most recent wedding photos showed Sam in Las Vegas, the ceremony taking place 4 years ago when Ryan was 5 years old. I remembered that time period clearly because Mike had started traveling more frequently, claiming his company was expanding into Nevada markets. I'd actually been proud of his professional growth, supportive of the additional income his expanded territory would bring our family. Instead, he'd been building another family entirely. The messages in the phone painted pictures of domestic routines that mirrored my own life with chilling precision. Ashley texted about grocery shopping and dinner plans, asking Mike's preferences for weekend meals in the same tone I used when planning our family dinners. Rachel sent photos of home improvement projects, seeking Mike's opinion on paint colors and furniture arrangements. Nicole shared updates about her work schedule, coordinating date nights around her nursing shifts, just as Mike and I navigated around my marketing agency deadlines. Amanda's messages were the most painful to read because they involved children. She sent pictures of school events and sporting activities, asking Mike to confirm which games he could attend and which school functions needed his presence. The casual ways she discussed carpools and parent-teacher conferences suggested a level of domestic partnership that required consistent involvement, not the occasional visits of a traveling businessman. Sam's communications focused heavily on planning future trips and adventures, her messages filled with excitement about vacations they were booking and experiences they wanted to share. Her tone was that of a newlywed, still in the honeymoon phase, eager to explore the world with her husband and build memories together. Reading through months of these parallel conversations, I began to understand the intricate logistics Mike must have mastered to maintain 5 separate households. His supposed sales territory wasn't random. It was carefully designed to provide legitimate reasons for regular travel to each city where he'd established a life. The timing of his trips followed patterns that suggested he was rotating through wives on a schedule, spending enough time with each to maintain the illusion of a committed marriage, while never staying long enough to raise suspicions about his frequent absences. The business trips I'd assumed were necessary for his career were actually a carefully orchestrated system for polygamous living. Every time he'd kiss me goodbye at Austin's airport, claiming to pursue new clients or service existing accounts, he'd been traveling to fulfill husbandly duties elsewhere. Every phone call during his travels, every text message about missing me and the kids had been sent while he was playing the same role in someone else's home. The sophistication of the deception staggered me. This wasn't the impulsive decision of a man who'd fallen into an affair. This was systematic fraud perpetrated over more than a decade. Mike had deliberately constructed a life that allowed him to maintain romantic relationships with multiple women simultaneously, leading each to believe she was his one and only wife, while carefully managing his time and attention to avoid detection. I found myself wondering about the practical details. How did he manage 5 different phone numbers? Were there multiple social security numbers involved, or had he found ways to legally marry multiple women using the same identity? How did he handle tax obligations, insurance policies, emergency contacts? What happened when his wives needed him during times that conflicted with his commitments elsewhere? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them, each one revealing new layers of complexity in Mike's double life. Or rather, his quintuple life. 5 wives meant 5 separate identities he was maintaining, 5 different versions of himself adapted to different women's expectations and needs. As I continued scrolling through the phone, I discovered that Mike's personas weren't identical across his marriages. With Ashley, he appeared to be more outdoorsy, photos showing them hiking and camping in Arizona's desert landscapes. His messages to Rachel suggested shared interests in cultural activities, mentioning museum visits and theater performances in Denver. Nicole received communications about fitness goals and health initiatives, indicating he'd positioned himself as someone committed to wellness and active living. Amanda's photos featured him as a devoted stepfather figure, actively engaged in her children's lives from what appeared to be a previous relationship. Sam's images portrayed him as adventurous and spontaneous, always ready for travel and new experiences. He'd customized himself for each woman, becoming whoever they needed him to be while carefully compartmentalizing these different aspects of his personality. The Mike who lived with me in Austin was yet another version, the responsible father and suburban husband focused on building a stable family life. None of us was getting the complete picture. We were each receiving carefully curated portions of a man who apparently didn't exist as a unified individual. The realization made me question everything I thought I knew about my own husband. Which version was real? Was any of them authentic? Or was Mike simply a skilled actor who'd learned to mirror the desires of whatever woman he was with at any given moment? Had he ever shown me his true self? Or had our entire relationship been another performance tailored to what he perceived I wanted in a partner? I thought about our courtship, trying to identify signs I'd missed or red flags I'd overlooked. We'd met at a business conference in Dallas, where Mike had been charming and attentive, seemingly focused entirely on me despite the networking opportunities surrounding us. He'd pursued me with the right balance of persistence and respect, calling when he said he would and following through on every promise. Our early relationship had felt magical, effortless, as if we'd been perfectly matched from the beginning. Now I wondered if that perfection had been artificial, the result of Mike's skill at reading people and adapting his approach accordingly. Had he studied me during our initial conversations, identifying my preferences and values, then molded himself to fit my ideal partner profile? The man I'd fallen in love with might have been a carefully constructed persona designed to win my heart, just as he'd apparently done with 4 other women before me. The thought made me nauseous. Every romantic gesture, every intimate conversation, every moment of connection I'd treasured as evidence of our deep compatibility might have been calculated manipulation. The proposal I'd considered spontaneous and heartfelt could have been one of 5 nearly identical performances, refined through repetition, until Mike had perfected the art of making each woman feel uniquely special. I found the photos from our own wedding in Mike's regular phone, which I retrieved from his nightstand for comparison. Holding both devices side by side, I could see subtle differences in his expressions and body language across the various ceremonies. With Ashley, he appeared confident and relaxed, suggesting their wedding had been his first, and he'd been genuinely excited about marriage. By the time he'd married Rachel 2 years later, his smile seemed more practiced, his poses more calculated. Our wedding photos showed him looking slightly tense, perhaps because he was managing the stress of maintaining multiple relationships by that point. Nicole's wedding pictures revealed a man who'd grown comfortable with the performance aspects of wedding ceremonies, his expressions perfectly calibrated for maximum romantic impact. Amanda's photos showed increasing sophistication in his approach to marriage photography, as if he'd learned exactly how to position himself and what expressions would create the most convincing images of marital bliss. Sam's recent wedding pictures displayed a man who'd mastered the art of appearing besotted, while maintaining emotional distance. His smile brilliant, but his eyes somehow disconnected. The evolution visible across these images told the story of a man who'd become increasingly skilled at manufacturing romantic moments, while potentially feeling less and less genuine connection to the women he was marrying. By the time he'd reached his fifth wedding, the process had clearly become routine, a series of steps to be executed rather than a heartfelt commitment to be celebrated. This realization forced me to reconsider every significant moment in our marriage through a new lens. Had Mike been emotionally present during Sophia's birth, or had he been mentally managing his obligations to his other wives? When we'd bought our house and celebrated achieving this milestone together, had he been simultaneously helping other wives achieve similar goals? During family vacations I'd treasured as bonding experiences, had he been counting down the days until he could return to his rotation of other families? The scope of his deception seemed to require not just organizational skills, but emotional compartmentalization that bordered on pathological. How does someone maintain intimate relationships with 5 different women without feeling overwhelmed by guilt or logistical stress? How does someone look their spouse in the eye every morning and evening while maintaining such elaborate lies? I began to understand that I wasn't just dealing with infidelity or even traditional polygamy. This was something far more complex and disturbing. A level of sustained deception that suggested either remarkable acting ability or a fundamental disconnect from normal human emotions. Either Mike was an exceptional manipulator who'd learned to perform love convincingly while feeling nothing genuine, or he possessed an ability to segment his emotional life so completely that he could experience authentic feelings for multiple women simultaneously, without recognizing the contradictions involved. Both possibilities terrified me because they suggested I'd been married to someone I'd never really known, someone whose capacity for deception far exceeded anything I'd considered possible in another human being. The man who'd held me during my mother's funeral might have been calculating how to balance his time between my grief and his other wives' needs. The father who'd coached Ryan's soccer team could have been mentally rehearsing similar performances for other children in other cities. Every memory I examined seemed contaminated by these new revelations. Every cherished moment now suspect as another example of Mike's ability to manufacture connection while maintaining emotional distance. The love I'd believed we shared might have been entirely one-sided, my genuine feelings met by skilled performance rather than reciprocal emotion. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across our bedroom floor, I realized I was holding evidence of crimes that extended far beyond personal betrayal. Bigamy was illegal in all 50 states, making Mike's multiple marriages a federal offense. The financial implications alone were staggering. Was he collecting spousal benefits under multiple identities? Had he filed fraudulent tax returns? Were there insurance policies involved that constituted fraud? The magnitude of the legal violations was overwhelming, but the personal devastation felt even larger. I wasn't just discovering that my husband had been unfaithful. I was learning that my entire adult life had been built on foundations of systematic deception. Every plan we'd made together, every dream we'd shared, every moment of intimacy we'd experienced had been contaminated by lies so extensive they redefined the nature of our relationship. The sound of children's voices from downstairs reminded me that Sophia and Ryan were living through an ordinary Friday afternoon, while their world prepared to collapse around them. They had no idea that their father's business trips were actually visits to other families, or that their parents' marriage was potentially invalid due to prior legal commitments. They believed in the security of their family unit while I sat upstairs discovering that everything they took for granted was built on criminal fraud. Protecting them from this knowledge while figuring out how to handle it became my immediate priority. They couldn't learn about their father's other lives from overhearing phone calls or accidentally discovering evidence. Whatever came next, I needed to control how this information was revealed to them, if it ever needed to be revealed at all. But first, I had to understand the complete scope of what I was dealing with. The phone in my hands contained months of evidence, but I needed to verify the information independently before taking any action. Were these women actually wives? Or just long-term girlfriends who believed they were wives? Were there legal marriage certificates involved? Or had Mike found ways to create the impression of marriage without actual legal commitments? The answers to these questions would determine whether I was dealing with massive personal betrayal or actual criminal activity that required law enforcement involvement. Either way, my life was about to change dramatically, but the specific nature of those changes depended on facts I hadn't yet uncovered. As evening approached and dinner time demanded my attention, I carefully returned both phones to their original locations and went downstairs to face my children's innocent questions about their father's return from Phoenix. Maintaining normalcy while processing the afternoon's discoveries required every ounce of acting ability I possessed, but somehow I managed to help with homework, prepare dinner, and engage in normal family conversations, while my mind reeled with the implications of Mike's secret lives. The weekend stretched ahead of me like a minefield of investigation and decision-making, each step potentially explosive, each discovery likely to reshape everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and myself. By Sunday evening, when Mike returned from what I now knew was likely a visit with Ashley in Phoenix, I would need to have decided how to confront him with evidence of polygamous fraud that could destroy not just our marriage, but our children's sense of security, and possibly Mike's freedom. The weight of those decisions pressed down on me as I tucked Ryan and Sophia into bed, their sleepy faces reflecting complete trust in the stability of their world. Tomorrow would begin the process of uncovering the full truth, whatever that might be and wherever it might lead. Saturday morning arrived with the deceptive normalcy of suburban weekend routines. Sophia had a soccer game at 10, Ryan needed to finish a science project, and I'd promised to take them to the farmer's market afterward for our weekly grocery shopping. The ordinary demands of motherhood forced me to compartmentalize the previous day's discoveries, at least temporarily, while maintaining the facade of a typical family weekend. But as I poured orange juice and distributed breakfast plates, my mind raced with plans for investigation. The kids would be occupied with activities most of the day, giving me opportunities to research Mike's other lives more thoroughly. I needed concrete evidence beyond the photos and messages on his secret phone, verification that could either confirm or disprove the scope of his deceptions. After dropping Sophia at her soccer field and settling Ryan at the kitchen table with his science materials, I retreated to my home office with my laptop and a determination to uncover the truth systematically. The internet had become a powerful tool for investigating people's backgrounds, and I intended to use every resource available to map out Mike's network of relationships. I started with basic searches, typing variations of Michael Martinez along with the cities where his other wives lived. Social media platforms yielded immediate results that made my stomach clench with recognition. There was Mike's Facebook profile under the name Michael A. Martinez, featuring relationship status married to Ashley Martinez, and profile pictures I'd seen in his secret phone. The account showed regular posting activity, sharing everything from anniversary celebrations to family barbecues with people I'd never met. Another profile under Michael D. Martinez displayed similar content focused on his life with Rachel in Denver. Photos showed them at Broncos games, hiking in the Rocky Mountains, and attending what appeared to be Rachel's work events. The timeline of posts corresponded perfectly with Mike's supposed business trips, confirming that his absences from our home were spent building relationships elsewhere. Each social media profile revealed not just relationships but entire social circles Mike had cultivated in different cities. He appeared in group photos at parties and gatherings, tagged in posts by friends who clearly knew him well, included in conversations about shared memories and inside jokes. These weren't superficial connections maintained for appearances. They represented deep integration into multiple communities where he was known and accepted as a committed partner. The sophistication of his online presence across different identities astounded me. Each profile was carefully curated to reflect the personality he'd adopted for that particular relationship. His profile connected to Ashley emphasized outdoor adventures and desert photography. The account linked to Rachel showcased cultural interests and urban exploration. His presence in Nicole's social media world focused on fitness activities and healthy living. Amanda's circles included him in family-oriented content involving her children. Sam's network portrayed him as a travel enthusiast, always planning the next adventure. But it was the marriage records that provided definitive proof of the crime I'd suspected. Online public record searches revealed legal marriage certificates spanning more than a decade. Michael Allen Martinez had married Ashley Thompson in Maricopa County, Arizona 12 years ago. Michael Daniel Martinez had wed Rachel Sullivan in Jefferson County, Colorado, 10 years ago. Michael Anthony Martinez had exchanged vows with Nicole Peterson in Multnomah County, Oregon, 7 years ago. Michael Andrew Martinez had married Amanda Foster in King County, Washington, 6 years ago. Michael Alexander Martinez had wed Samantha Roberts in Clark County, Nevada, 4 years ago. Each certificate bore Mike's signature and personal information, with only slight variations in middle names and addresses that wouldn't prevent cross-referencing but might delay discovery by authorities. The documents proved that Mike hadn't simply been maintaining multiple romantic relationships. He'd entered into legal marriages while already being legally married, making him guilty of felony bigamy in multiple jurisdictions. The financial implications became clearer as I researched property records and business registrations. Mike was listed as co-owner or sole owner of residential properties in each city where he maintained wives. The house Ashley lived in was registered under both their names, as was Rachel's Denver condo and Nicole's Portland townhouse. Amanda's Seattle home showed Mike as a co-signer on the mortgage, while Sam's Las Vegas apartment was leased under both their names. The scope of financial fraud required to support 5 households staggered me. Even with the substantial income Mike claimed from his sales work, maintaining multiple mortgages, utilities, insurance policies, and family expenses would require resources far beyond what any legitimate job could provide. Either Mike was involved in illegal income generation, or he was manipulating financial systems in ways that constituted additional crimes. Credit monitoring websites revealed multiple credit profiles associated with Mike's various identities. Each version of Michael Martinez maintained separate credit histories, bank accounts, and financial obligations. The level of identity manipulation required to achieve this suggested either stolen Social Security numbers or sophisticated knowledge of how to exploit weaknesses in financial verification systems. As I compiled this evidence, the true magnitude of Mike's criminal enterprise became apparent. This wasn't simply a man who'd made poor choices in his personal life. This was someone running an elaborate fraud operation that touched multiple states and federal systems. The crimes involved weren't just violations of marriage laws, but potentially included identity theft, mortgage fraud, tax evasion, and wire fraud across state lines. The personal devastation remained overwhelming, but now it was accompanied by fear about legal consequences that could affect my children's futures. If Mike was arrested and prosecuted for these crimes, what would happen to the properties registered in his various names? Would our Austin home be seized as proceeds of criminal activity? Could our joint bank accounts be frozen during investigation? Were Sophia and Ryan legally considered his children if our marriage was invalid due to his prior legal commitments? The questions spiraled into increasingly complex territory that I knew I couldn't navigate alone. This situation required legal expertise in criminal law, family law, and financial crimes. I needed professional guidance not just to understand my options, but to protect my children from the worst consequences of their father's actions. My friend Rebecca immediately came to mind. As a divorce attorney who'd built her practice around high-conflict family law cases, she'd encountered complex situations involving fraud and deception before. More importantly, I trusted her to provide honest advice even when it was difficult to hear, and her professional ethics would protect the confidentiality of what I needed to share. I sent Rebecca a carefully worded text message asking if she could meet me that afternoon, describing the situation only as urgent family matter requiring legal advice. Her response came within minutes, offering to meet at her office despite it being Saturday, and suggesting the seriousness she detected in my message. After arranging childcare with my neighbor for a few hours, I drove downtown to Rebecca's law office, carrying printed copies of everything I'd discovered. The evidence filled a thick folder that seemed inadequate to contain the explosive nature of its contents. My hands shook as I rode the elevator to her floor, knowing that sharing this information would make the crisis real in ways I hadn't yet been forced to confront. Rebecca's office occupied a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Austin. She'd decorated the space to feel welcoming rather than intimidating, understanding that family law clients often arrived in emotional turmoil. As I settled into the chair across from her desk, I appreciated the calming effect of her warm smile and patient demeanor. "What's going on, Jess?" she asked gently, her expression shifting to concern as she took in my appearance. I hadn't slept well and knew the stress showed on my face despite my attempts to maintain composure. I took a deep breath and began explaining yesterday's discovery, starting with the forgotten gym bag and progressing through the secret phone, the photos, the messages, and finally the research that had confirmed my worst fears. Rebecca listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly serious as the scope of Mike's deceptions became clear. When I finished my account and handed her the folder of evidence, Rebecca whistled softly under her breath. "Jess, this is extraordinary. I've handled cases involving emotional affairs and even some financial fraud, but nothing approaching this level of systematic deception. You're dealing with potential federal crimes here." She spent the next hour reviewing the documents I'd compiled, occasionally asking questions about timelines or specific details. Her legal training allowed her to spot implications I'd missed, connections that could strengthen or complicate any future case against Mike. "The good news is that your marriage to Mike appears to be legally valid," she said finally, setting down the stack of marriage certificates. "Arizona doesn't have common law marriage, so his relationship with Ashley, while it may have included a ceremony, wouldn't automatically invalidate your later legal union. However, if Mike was still legally married to Ashley when he married you, then he committed bigamy at that point." She paused, consulting her notes. "The bad news is that this situation is far more complex than typical divorce cases. We're looking at criminal fraud that could involve federal agencies, asset forfeiture, and financial investigations that might freeze accounts and properties pending resolution." The practical implications she outlined were sobering. Even if I decided to divorce Mike immediately, the process would be complicated by ongoing criminal investigations. Assets acquired during our marriage might be considered proceeds of criminal activity, making property division contentious and potentially leaving me with fewer resources than typical divorce proceedings would provide. "The most important thing right now is protecting you and your children," Rebecca emphasized. "We need to document everything you've discovered, secure copies of financial records, and potentially alert authorities about the identity fraud aspects of this case. But we also need to think strategically about timing and how to minimize disruption to Sophia and Ryan." She recommended consulting with a criminal defense attorney who could advise me about my own potential legal exposure, since some of Mike's fraudulent activities might have involved joint accounts or shared assets that could implicate me as an unwitting accomplice. The thought that I might face criminal charges for crimes I knew nothing about added another layer of terror to an already overwhelming situation. We discussed the immediate steps I needed to take before confronting Mike. Securing independent financial resources became a priority, since our joint accounts might be frozen if criminal charges were filed. I needed to gather copies of all important documents, including birth certificates, social security cards, tax returns, and insurance policies, storing them in locations Mike couldn't access. Rebecca also stressed the importance of maintaining detailed records of Mike's whereabouts and activities when he returned from his current trip. If his criminal behavior was going to be prosecuted, providing law enforcement with comprehensive evidence of his patterns would strengthen any potential case and demonstrate my cooperation with authorities. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours, covering everything from immediate safety concerns to long-term financial planning for potentially becoming a single mother. By the time I left Rebecca's office, I had a clear action plan and a much better understanding of the legal landscape I was navigating, but I also felt the full weight of how dramatically my life was about to change. Driving home through familiar Austin neighborhoods, I struggled to reconcile the normal Saturday afternoon activities happening around me with the extraordinary circumstances I was facing. Families walked dogs and worked in yards, couples ran errands together, children played in parks, all of them living in the kind of straightforward reality I'd thought I shared just 24 hours earlier. Now I was returning home to continue investigating my husband's criminal enterprise, while maintaining the pretense of normal family life for my children's sake. The cognitive dissonance between these two realities made me feel like I was living in parallel dimensions, moving between them without warning or preparation. When I arrived home, Sophia had returned from her soccer game victorious and energetic, eager to share details about her team's performance and plans for the following week's tournament. Ryan had completed his science project and was asking about our promised trip to the farmer's market. Their innocent enthusiasm for typical weekend activities provided both comfort and heartbreak, reminding me of what we stood to lose when this crisis inevitably exploded into the open. I managed to fulfill my parental obligations for the remainder of the day, taking them to the market, helping with weekend homework, and maintaining our usual bedtime routines. But throughout these activities, my mind remained focused on Monday's tasks and the confrontation that awaited when Mike returned home Sunday evening. The evidence I'd gathered was comprehensive enough to prove Mike's crimes beyond reasonable doubt, but I still needed to understand his motivations and methods before deciding how to proceed. Would he admit to everything when confronted, or would he attempt to lie his way out of consequences? Did he have any awareness of the pain his actions would cause our children? Or had he compartmentalized his emotions so thoroughly that he couldn't recognize the devastation he was creating? These questions would be answered soon, but first I needed to complete my investigation by attempting to contact the other wives. Understanding their situations and experiences would provide crucial context for decisions about Mike's future and my family's safety. If they were also unaware of each other's existence, then they deserved to know the truth as much as I did. Sunday would bring the final phase of discovery before the inevitable confrontation that would determine the course of our family's future. Whatever that confrontation revealed, whatever decisions followed, I knew there was no path back to the innocence and security we'd enjoyed just days earlier. Mike's crimes had irrevocably changed our lives, and the only remaining question was how much additional damage would occur before the truth was fully exposed. Sunday morning dawned gray and overcast, matching the heaviness that had settled in my chest since Friday's discovery. The children slept late, exhausted from yesterday's activities, giving me precious quiet hours to finalize my investigation before Mike's evening return from Phoenix. I'd spent most of the night lying awake, rehearsing different scenarios for our inevitable confrontation and trying to prepare myself for whatever additional revelations might emerge. The most difficult part of my investigation remained ahead of me, contacting the other wives. Throughout my research, I debated whether to reach out to them before confronting Mike, uncertain about the ethics and potential consequences of revealing information that would devastate their lives, just as it had shattered mine. But Rebecca had convinced me that these women deserved to know the truth, both for their own protection and as potential witnesses if criminal charges were filed. I decided to start with Ashley, since she appeared to be Mike's first wife and might have the longest perspective on his behavior patterns. Her Facebook profile provided enough personal information to locate her phone number through online directories, and her regular posting schedule suggested she was active on social media and might respond to contact from a stranger. My hands trembled as I dialed her number, unsure how to begin a conversation that would destroy everything she believed about her marriage. The phone rang 4 times before a cheerful voice answered, immediately identifiable from the voicemails Mike had saved on his secret phone. "Hello, this is Ashley." "Hi, Ashley. My name is Jessica Martinez," I began, my voice catching slightly on our shared last name. "I'm calling about Mike, your husband Michael Martinez. I need to speak with you about something very important." There was a pause, and when Ashley spoke again, her tone had shifted from cheerful to cautious. "I'm sorry, who is this? How do you know Mike?" "This is going to be very difficult to hear," I said gently, "but I'm also married to Mike. I discovered yesterday that he's been living multiple lives, and I believe you deserve to know the truth." The silence that followed stretched so long, I wondered if Ashley had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "That's impossible. Mike and I have been married for 12 years. We live together in Phoenix. You must have the wrong person." "I wish I did," I replied, my heart breaking for the pain I was about to cause. "But I have photos of your wedding, messages between you and Mike, and documentation that proves he's been maintaining relationships with multiple women while married to each of us." I could hear Ashley's breathing become rapid and shallow. "This can't be true. Mike was just here yesterday. He's on a business trip to Austin right now, but he'll be home tonight. We're planning our anniversary celebration next month." The overlap in our timelines confirmed what I'd suspected. Mike had spent yesterday with Ashley in Phoenix while I was discovering his secret phone and researching his other marriages. Tonight, he would return to Austin and resume his role as my husband, seamlessly transitioning between identities as he'd apparently done for years. "Ashley, I know this is overwhelming," I said carefully, "but I can prove what I'm telling you. Would you be willing to video chat so I can show you the evidence I've found?" She agreed, though her voice remained shaky with shock and disbelief. Within minutes, we were connected through a video call that allowed me to share my screen and walk her through the documentation I'd compiled. Watching Ashley's face as she processed the marriage certificates, property records, and photos was like witnessing my own emotional journey compressed into real time. "Oh my God," she whispered as she recognized Mike in wedding photos with other women. "Oh my God, this is real. How many others are there?" "4 that I've identified so far," I answered. "Rachel in Denver, Nicole in Portland, Amanda in Seattle, and Sam in Las Vegas. There may be more." Ashley began crying as the full scope of Mike's deception became clear. Her sobs echoed my own grief from Friday night, the sound of a life being torn apart by revelations too large to immediately comprehend. We spent the next hour sharing information about Mike's behavior patterns, comparing his explanations for his frequent absences and his methods of maintaining separate identities. Ashley revealed details that filled gaps in my understanding of Mike's operations. He'd convinced her that his job required extensive travel throughout the Southwest, using a cover story nearly identical to what he'd told me. He maintained separate bank accounts that he claimed were for business expenses, handled all tax preparations privately, and had established credit cards and financial accounts she never saw statements for. "He's been the perfect husband," Ashley said through tears. "Attentive when he's here, helpful around the house, great with my extended family. I never suspected anything because he always had reasonable explanations for everything. His work schedule was demanding, but he made sure to prioritize our relationship whenever he was home." Her description matched my own experience exactly. Mike had mastered the art of being intensely present during his time with each wife, creating such strong emotional connections that his absences felt manageable rather than suspicious. He'd apparently studied each woman's needs and preferences, adapting his behavior to provide exactly the kind of partnership each desired. Ashley agreed to help me contact the other wives, recognizing that they deserved to know the truth as much as we had. She offered to reach out to Rachel while I contacted Nicole, reasoning that hearing from another woman in the same situation might make the devastating news slightly easier to process. The conversation with Rachel followed a similar pattern, though her initial reaction was anger rather than shock. As a nurse accustomed to dealing with crisis situations, she moved quickly from disbelief to demanding evidence, to beginning strategic planning about next steps. Rachel's practical approach provided valuable insights into Mike's financial manipulations, since she'd noticed irregularities in his income reporting that had puzzled her during their tax preparations. "I knew something wasn't right," Rachel admitted during our video call. "Mike always handled the taxes alone, claiming his commission structure was too complex for me to understand. But I saw some of the paperwork, and the numbers never seemed to match what he told me about his earnings. I thought maybe he was hiding income to avoid higher tax brackets, not funding multiple households." Rachel's suspicions had been aroused by Mike's reluctance to combine their finances more completely, though she'd attributed his caution to bad experiences with previous relationships rather than ongoing legal commitments elsewhere. She'd pushed for joint accounts and shared financial planning, but Mike had always deflected these conversations with reasonable-sounding explanations about keeping business and personal expenses separate. Nicole proved more difficult to reach, requiring several attempts before she answered her phone. When I finally connected with her, her reaction was immediate and intense panic. Unlike Ashley's disbelief or Rachel's anger, Nicole became hysterical upon learning about Mike's other marriages, her distress so severe that I worried about her emotional stability. "This explains everything," Nicole gasped between sobs. "I've been feeling like I was going crazy, like something was fundamentally wrong with our relationship, but I couldn't identify what. Mike has been so secretive about his work, so protective of his phone and computer, always leaving the room to take calls. I thought maybe he was planning to leave me, but I never imagined this." Nicole's experience revealed that Mike's deception hadn't been as seamless as I had initially believed. She'd developed significant anxiety about their relationship over the past year, sensing that Mike was emotionally distant despite his physical presence. Her intuition had detected the fraud even when her conscious mind couldn't identify specific evidence, creating psychological distress that had affected her work performance and social relationships. "I started seeing a therapist 6 months ago because I felt like I was losing my mind," Nicole admitted. I kept telling her that something felt wrong with my marriage, but I couldn't explain what. Nicole's therapist had suggested she might be projecting her own insecurities onto her marriage, advice that had made her question her instincts and feel even more confused about her relationship with Mike. The professional dismissal of her concerns had compounded her psychological distress, creating a cycle where she doubted her own perceptions, while the anxiety continued to build. I feel so vindicated and so horrified at the same time, Nicole continued through her tears. My gut was right, but the reality is so much worse than anything I imagined. How do we even begin to process something like this? Her question echoed the thoughts that had been circling in my mind since Friday evening. The scope of Mike's betrayal seemed too large for normal emotional processing, too complex for traditional relationship recovery methods. We weren't dealing with a single affair or even multiple affairs. We were uncovering a systematic fraud that had reshaped all of our lives in ways we were only beginning to understand. Amanda's reaction when I finally reached her was perhaps the most devastating to witness. Unlike the other wives, she had children from a previous relationship who had bonded with Mike as a stepfather figure. Learning that their family unit was built on lies would affect not just her but 3 children who had come to love and depend on Mike as a parental figure. My kids adore him, Amanda sobbed when I showed her the evidence of Mike's other marriages. They call him Dad Mike, and he's been so good to them. How do I explain that the man they trust most in the world has been lying to all of us? How do I help them understand that he might disappear from their lives forever? Her children ranged in age from 6 to 14, old enough to understand that something catastrophic was happening to their family structure, but too young to comprehend the legal and emotional complexities involved. Amanda faced the additional burden of protecting children who weren't biologically Mike's, while navigating her own emotional devastation. He helped my son with his homework every night when he was here, Amanda continued, her voice breaking. He coached my daughter's softball team last summer. He walked my oldest to her first day of high school because her biological father wasn't available. These kids have lost one father figure already, and now they're going to lose another, through no fault of their own. The impact on children emerged as a common thread connecting all of Mike's marriages. Ashley had been trying to conceive for several years, undergoing fertility treatments that Mike had supported both emotionally and financially. Rachel had postponed having children because Mike had convinced her they should wait until his career was more stable, a delay that now seemed like another calculated manipulation. Nicole had suffered a miscarriage 2 years earlier, with Mike providing comfort and support that had deepened her emotional attachment to him. Each woman had built her future plans around a relationship with Mike that included children, whether biological children they hoped to have together or existing children from previous relationships. His deception hadn't just stolen years of their lives. It had potentially cost them opportunities for motherhood or stable family structures that couldn't be recovered once the truth was revealed. Sam proved to be the most difficult wife to contact, perhaps because her marriage to Mike was the most recent, and she remained in what appeared to be a honeymoon phase. When I finally reached her through social media messaging, her initial response was hostile and defensive, rather than shocked or saddened. I don't know who you are or what game you're playing, Sam typed in response to my careful explanation. But Mike and I are happily married and building a life together. If you're some kind of stalker or ex-girlfriend trying to cause problems, you need to leave us alone. Her reaction suggested that Mike had prepared her for potential contact from previous relationships, perhaps framing any such outreach as harassment from unstable ex-partners rather than legitimate concerns from current wives. The possibility that Mike had anticipated discovery and developed countermeasures added another layer of calculation to his deception. It took nearly an hour of patient explanation and careful presentation of evidence before Sam began to accept that what I was telling her was true. Even then, her response was different from the other wives. Rather than immediate grief or anger, she seemed to shift into problem-solving mode, asking detailed questions about Mike's financial resources and legal vulnerabilities. So what's our next move? Sam asked during our eventual video call. How do we protect ourselves legally and financially before this whole thing explodes? I assume he's got assets hidden that we don't know about, and I want to make sure I get my fair share before the lawyers and government agencies start seizing everything. Her practical approach to the crisis was both refreshing and unsettling. While the other wives were processing the emotional devastation of learning their marriages were fraudulent, Sam was already calculating how to minimize her losses and position herself advantageously for whatever legal proceedings would follow. Her response suggested she might have suspected something was unusual about Mike's circumstances, even if she hadn't identified the specific nature of his deception. By Sunday afternoon, I had spoken with all 5 of Mike's wives and begun coordinating our responses to the crisis. We formed an informal support network, sharing information about Mike's behavior patterns and pooling our knowledge about his financial activities. The collective picture that emerged was of a man who had perfected the art of emotional manipulation while maintaining strict operational security to prevent discovery. Each wife had been carefully isolated from information that might have revealed Mike's other relationships. He used different phone numbers, email addresses, and social media accounts for each marriage, never allowing overlap between his various identities. His travel schedule was precisely managed to avoid conflicts, with detailed explanations for his absences that played into each woman's particular concerns and expectations. Mike had also cultivated different aspects of his personality for each relationship, becoming whoever each woman needed him to be. With Ashley, he was the adventurous outdoorsman who shared her love of hiking and camping. With Rachel, he was the sophisticated urban professional who appreciated culture and fine dining. With Nicole, he was the health-conscious partner committed to fitness and wellness. With Amanda, he was the devoted stepfather who prioritized family stability. With Sam, he was the spontaneous romantic who kept their relationship exciting with surprise trips and grand gestures. The realization that we had each fallen in love with carefully constructed personas rather than authentic aspects of Mike's character added psychological complexity to our trauma. Who was the real Mike Martinez? Did he exist as a unified individual, or was he simply an actor who had learned to inhabit whatever role each situation required? These questions became more pressing as Sunday evening approached, and Mike's return from Phoenix drew near. I had spent the weekend gathering evidence, consulting with legal counsel, and coordinating with his other wives, but I still hadn't decided exactly how to confront him with what I'd discovered. The sheer scope of his deception made it difficult to know where to begin or how to force him to tell the complete truth. Rebecca had advised me to record any conversation with Mike, both for potential legal proceedings and for my own protection if he became aggressive or threatening when cornered. The other wives had agreed to remain available by phone during my confrontation, providing support and serving as witnesses to whatever admissions Mike might make. As evening shadows lengthened across our Austin neighborhood, I sent the children to my father's house for what I told them would be a fun sleepover with their grandfather. They accepted the explanation without question, unaware that I was removing them from potential danger before confronting their father with evidence of federal crimes. Mike's flight was scheduled to land at Austin Bergstrom International Airport at 7:30, with his usual arrival home around 8:45. I spent the final hour before his return reviewing my notes, organizing the evidence I planned to present, and trying to prepare myself emotionally for what would likely be the most difficult conversation of my life. At exactly 8:42, I heard Mike's key in the front door, followed by his familiar voice calling out his usual greeting. "Honey, I'm home. How was everyone's weekend?" The casual normalcy of his arrival, the complete absence of guilt or anxiety in his tone, demonstrated the depth of his compartmentalization abilities. He had spent the weekend with Ashley in Phoenix, maintaining his role as her devoted husband, and now he was seamlessly transitioning back into his identity as my partner and the father of our children. "We need to talk," I called back, my voice steadier than I had expected. "I'm in the living room." Mike appeared in the doorway moments later, still wearing his travel clothes and carrying the leather briefcase he used for business trips. His expression was mildly curious rather than concerned, suggesting he interpreted my tone as indicating routine domestic discussion, rather than the life-altering confrontation that was about to unfold. "Sure, what's up?" he asked, settling into his usual spot on the couch and reaching for the television remote. "Sorry, I'm a little later than expected. The flight was delayed, and traffic from the airport was terrible." I remained standing, knowing that maintaining physical distance would help me stay focused during what was about to happen. "Where are the kids?" he asked, noticing their absence for the first time. "They're at my father's house for the night," I replied. "I thought we might need privacy for this conversation." Something in my tone finally penetrated his casual demeanor, and his expression shifted to mild concern. Privacy for what conversation? Jess, you're making me nervous. What's going on? I took a deep breath and reached for his gym bag, which I had positioned strategically on the coffee table. You forgot this when you left for Phoenix, I said, unzipping the bag and removing his secret phone, along with some interesting evidence about your other life. The transformation in Mike's expression was instant and dramatic. The casual confidence evaporated, replaced by something between panic and calculation, as he processed what I was holding and what it might mean for his carefully maintained deceptions. I can explain, he said quickly, the words tumbling out in a rush. It's not what you think. That phone belongs to a client, and I was holding it for them during the trip. There's a perfectly reasonable explanation for whatever you think you saw. His immediate resort to lies, even when caught with undeniable evidence, revealed the depth of his commitment to maintaining his fraud. Even faced with exposure, his instinct was to continue deceiving rather than acknowledging the truth. I've seen the photos, Mike, I said quietly, powering on the phone and showing him the wedding pictures with Ashley. I've read the messages from Rachel, Nicole, Amanda, and Sam. I've researched the marriage certificates and property records. I know about all of them. The blood drained from Mike's face as he realized the scope of what I had discovered. His mouth opened and closed several times without sound, as if his brain couldn't formulate a response adequate to the situation he was facing. I've spent the weekend talking to your other wives, I continued, watching his expression grow increasingly desperate. They all know about each other now. They all know about me. Your secret is out, Mike, and there's no explanation that's going to make this go away. He slumped back into the couch cushions, his body language shifting from defensive to defeated as the magnitude of his exposure became clear. For several long moments, we sat in silence while he processed the complete collapse of the elaborate structure he had spent more than a decade building. How long have you known? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Since Friday evening when your gym bag was sitting by our bedroom door instead of on your supposed business trip to Phoenix. He nodded slowly, as if filing this information away for future reference. Even in the midst of complete exposure, part of his mind seemed to be analyzing his operational failures and considering how he might have avoided detection. Are you going to call the police? He asked. The question confirmed that he understood the criminal nature of his actions, that this wasn't simply a matter of personal betrayal, but of federal crimes that could result in imprisonment. His concern about law enforcement involvement suggested he had always known he was committing serious offenses, even as he continued expanding his network of fraudulent marriages. I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly. That depends partly on what you tell me right now. I want the complete truth, Mike. All of it. How this started, how you've maintained it, what else you've been hiding. No more lies, no more explanations. Just the truth. He looked at me for a long moment, seeming to weigh his options and calculate the potential consequences of various responses. When he finally began speaking, his voice carried a resignation that suggested he had always known this moment would eventually arrive. It started with Ashley, he said slowly. We got married when I was young and stupid, thinking I was ready for commitment when I really wasn't. But instead of getting divorced when I realized I'd made a mistake, I just started traveling more for work and met Rachel during a business trip to Denver. His confession began to pour out in a rush, as if the relief of finally telling the truth after years of careful deception was overwhelming his usual caution. The story he told was even more complex and disturbing than what I had imagined, revealing layers of calculation and manipulation that extended far beyond what the evidence had suggested. I never meant for it to become what it did, he continued. Each relationship just felt separate from the others, like different parts of my life that didn't have to connect. I convinced myself that I was making everyone happy, that as long as no one knew about the others, no one was being hurt. The justifications he offered revealed a psychology that was either profoundly narcissistic or fundamentally disconnected from normal human empathy. His ability to compartmentalize his emotional life so completely that he could maintain intimate relationships with 5 different women simultaneously suggested either remarkable acting ability or a personality disorder that prevented him from forming genuine attachments. As his confession continued, I began to understand that I wasn't just dealing with a man who had made poor choices in his personal life, but with someone whose capacity for deception and manipulation extended into every aspect of his existence. The Mike Martinez I thought I had married had never really existed. He was simply another carefully constructed persona designed to meet my particular emotional needs. The realization that our entire relationship had been built on calculated fraud rather than genuine connection was perhaps the most devastating aspect of the evening's revelations. I hadn't just lost my husband. I had learned that the man I thought was my husband had never existed at all. Mike's confession unfolded over the next 3 hours, like a masterclass in methodical deception. As he spoke, I began to understand that what I had discovered was only the surface layer of an operation that had consumed his entire adult life. The financial structures supporting 5 households were far more complex than I had imagined, involving shell companies, false documentation, and income streams that extended well beyond any legitimate sales position. The job with Regional Sales Solutions doesn't exist, he admitted, his voice growing steadier as he settled into full disclosure. I created that company name and all the supporting documentation to explain my income and travel schedule. The real money comes from identity theft consulting, helping other people establish new identities for various reasons. I learned the techniques initially to support my own situation, but it became profitable enough to fund everything else. The revelation that Mike was running a criminal enterprise beyond just bigamy sent a chill through me. He wasn't simply a man who had made terrible personal choices. He was actively engaged in helping others commit crimes, creating false identities that could be used for fraud, tax evasion, or worse. The scope of his criminal activity made me an unwitting accomplice to federal crimes I had never suspected. How many people have you helped create false identities? I asked, dreading the answer. Maybe 24 over the past 8 years, he replied matter-of-factly. Nothing violent or really harmful, mostly people trying to escape debt or start over after bankruptcy. But the profit margins are incredible, and it gave me the expertise to manage my own situation more effectively. His casual dismissal of the potential harm caused by identity theft revealed a moral blindness that was deeply disturbing. The people whose identities he had stolen to create his false personas were real victims, whose lives had been disrupted by his crimes. The clients he had helped establish new identities might have used those false documents for purposes far more serious than escaping debt. What about taxes? I pressed. How have you been filing returns for 5 different identities without getting caught? Mike's explanation revealed a sophisticated understanding of how to exploit weaknesses in federal systems. He had established separate tax identification numbers for his various personas, filing returns that showed modest income levels for each identity, while keeping the total below thresholds that would trigger intensive auditing. The complexity of managing multiple tax obligations while avoiding detection required skills that suggested extensive research into government processes. The key is staying below the radar, he explained. Each identity maintains a low enough profile that no single return attracts attention, but collectively they provide enough legitimate income documentation to support the mortgages and other financial obligations. It's all about understanding the algorithms that flag suspicious activity. As his confession continued, I realized that Mike's criminal expertise extended far beyond what was necessary to maintain his polygamous lifestyle. He had become genuinely skilled at identity fraud, developing techniques and knowledge that could be applied to increasingly serious crimes. The man I had trusted with my children's safety was someone who could have stolen anyone's identity, created false documents for dangerous criminals, or helped fugitives evade law enforcement. What happens now? I asked when his initial confession reached its natural conclusion. Do you understand that what you've done isn't just divorce-worthy but prison-worthy? We're talking about federal crimes that could result in decades of imprisonment. Mike's response revealed that he had always understood the potential consequences of his actions, but had convinced himself that the operational security he had developed would prevent discovery indefinitely. He had created contingency plans for various scenarios, including bank accounts in different names and documentation that would allow him to disappear entirely if his network of relationships began to unravel. I have enough money hidden away to support myself for several years if I need to run, he admitted. Swiss accounts, cryptocurrency, physical assets stored in safety deposit boxes under different names. I always knew this might fall apart eventually, so I prepared for that possibility. The revelation that Mike had been preparing to abandon all of his wives, and potentially his children if his crimes were discovered, added another layer of betrayal to an already devastating situation. He had claimed to love each of us, but his actions proved that his primary commitment was to his own freedom and financial security. We were all disposable components in a criminal enterprise rather than genuine partners in meaningful relationships. "What about our children?" I demanded. "What about Amanda's kids who call you dad? Were you prepared to just disappear from their lives without explanation if you got caught?" For the first time during his confession, Mike showed genuine emotion. His composure cracked as he considered the impact his crimes would have on the children who had become attached to him as a father figure. The tears that appeared in his eyes seemed authentic, suggesting that his feelings for the children might be the only genuine emotions he had experienced throughout this entire deception. "I told myself I would never let it get to that point," he said quietly. "I convinced myself that I could maintain everything indefinitely, that I could be a good father and husband to everyone without anyone getting hurt. I know how that sounds now, but at the time it felt possible." His attempt to rationalize his choices as protection for the children rang hollow given the systematic nature of his deception. He had been willing to risk their emotional devastation and financial security for years, while building escape plans that would have abandoned them entirely. The psychological damage his eventual discovery would cause to children who trusted him was a consequence he had been willing to accept in exchange for maintaining his fraudulent lifestyle. "Do the other wives know about your criminal activities beyond the bigamy?" I asked. "No," he replied quickly. "They all believe I work in legitimate sales. I kept that part of my life completely separate from my relationships. The identity theft consulting happens under different names that none of you have ever heard." This compartmentalization suggested that Mike's criminal activities were even more extensive than what he had admitted. If he was maintaining separate identities for his illegal business operations, there might be additional bank accounts, properties, and financial obligations that neither I nor his other wives knew about. The full scope of his criminal enterprise could be far larger than what he was revealing, even during this supposedly complete confession. "I need to see everything," I told him. "All the accounts, all the documentation, all the evidence of what you've been doing. If I'm going to make decisions about our family's future, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Mike hesitated, clearly reluctant to provide information that would expose the full extent of his criminal activities. His willingness to confess to bigamy while protecting details about his other crimes suggested he was still calculating how to minimize his legal exposure rather than providing complete transparency. "Some of that information could implicate you if law enforcement gets involved," he warned. "Joint accounts, shared assets, tax returns we filed together. The more you know about the illegal aspects, the more difficult it becomes to maintain your innocence if this goes to trial." His concern for my legal protection might have been genuine, but it also served his interests by limiting how much evidence I could provide to authorities. The complexity of determining what information was safe for me to possess highlighted how thoroughly his crimes had contaminated every aspect of our shared life. Over the following hours, Mike provided access to numerous hidden accounts and documentation that revealed the true scope of his operations. The financial resources he had accumulated through identity theft consulting far exceeded what would have been necessary to support 5 households. He had been building wealth systematically, apparently planning for a future that didn't necessarily include any of his current wives or obligations. The discovery of these additional resources fundamentally changed my understanding of Mike's motivations. This wasn't a man who had stumbled into polygamy through emotional weakness or poor decision-making. This was someone who had deliberately constructed a criminal enterprise that used romantic relationships as cover for more serious illegal activities. Each marriage provided legitimacy and emotional camouflage for someone whose primary identity was as a criminal entrepreneur. As dawn approached, I realized that the man sitting across from me bore no resemblance to the husband I thought I had known for 8 years. Every conversation we had shared, every intimate moment we had experienced, every plan we had made for our future, had been contaminated by lies so extensive they had redefined the nature of our relationship entirely. "What do you want from me now?" Mike asked as his confession reached its conclusion. "Are you going to turn me in to the authorities, or is there some way we can work through this privately?" His question revealed that he still didn't understand the magnitude of what he had done, or the impossibility of maintaining normal relationships after such systematic betrayal. He seemed to believe that his confession might lead to forgiveness or at least negotiated consequences rather than the complete destruction of everything we had built together. "I want you to turn yourself in," I said quietly. "I want you to accept responsibility for what you've done and face the legal consequences of your choices. And I want you to do everything possible to minimize the damage to the children who have been hurt by your deception." Mike's reaction to my demand was immediate and negative. Despite his extensive confession, he wasn't prepared to voluntarily surrender to law enforcement or accept imprisonment for his crimes. His willingness to tell me the truth didn't extend to accepting the consequences of that truth in a legal context. "I can't do that, Jess," he said firmly. "Prison would destroy any chance of maintaining relationships with the kids or supporting any of you financially. If I disappear entirely and establish a new identity somewhere else, at least I could send money periodically to help with expenses." His proposal to become a fugitive rather than face justice demonstrated that even his confession had been strategic rather than genuine remorse. He was willing to admit his crimes to me privately, but not to accept public accountability for the harm he had caused multiple families. The conversation that followed became increasingly tense as I realized that Mike's cooperation would be limited to information sharing rather than accepting responsibility for his actions. He had revealed the truth about his crimes, but expected to negotiate the consequences rather than face them through legitimate legal processes. By morning, I had made my decision. The evidence Mike had provided, combined with what I had gathered independently, would be turned over to federal authorities. The other wives deserved justice for the fraud that had been perpetrated against them, and the children involved deserved to understand that actions have consequences, even when those actions are committed by people they love. "I'm going to contact the FBI this morning," I told Mike, as the sun rose over our Austin neighborhood. "I'll give you 24 hours to make arrangements for voluntary surrender, but after that, I'm providing them with everything I know about your operations." Mike's response was swift and decisive. Rather than accepting my ultimatum or attempting further negotiation, he simply stood up and walked toward the door. "Then I guess this is goodbye," he said without looking back. I watched from the window as he loaded several suitcases into his car, apparently retrieving packed bags that had been stored in his vehicle for exactly this type of emergency. Within 30 minutes of my ultimatum, Mike had disappeared from our neighborhood and our lives entirely, becoming a fugitive from justice rather than facing accountability for his actions. The weeks that followed brought a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and federal investigation that turned all of our lives upside down. The FBI took Mike's case seriously, launching a multi-state investigation that uncovered additional victims and crimes beyond what any of us had suspected. His identity theft consulting operation had been far more extensive than he had admitted, involving dozens of false identities and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent financial activity. The other wives and I became key witnesses in a federal case that attracted national attention as an example of how modern technology could be used to perpetrate elaborate relationship fraud. Our stories helped prosecutors understand the emotional manipulation techniques Mike had used to maintain his network of relationships while building his criminal enterprise. 6 months after Mike's disappearance, federal agents located him in Mexico living under another false identity. His extradition and eventual trial resulted in a 15-year federal sentence for identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud, and bigamy across multiple jurisdictions. The financial assets he had accumulated through his criminal activities were seized and partially distributed among his victims, providing some compensation for the financial damage he had caused. For the children involved, the aftermath proved to be the most challenging aspect of the entire situation. Sophia and Ryan struggled to understand how their father could have maintained such elaborate lies while appearing to love them genuinely. Amanda's children faced the additional trauma of losing a stepfather figure they had trusted completely. The therapy and counseling required to help them process this betrayal became a long-term commitment that stretched across years rather than months. The other wives and I maintained contact throughout the legal proceedings and beyond, forming an unlikely support network born from shared trauma. Ashley eventually moved to Austin to be closer to the support system we had developed. Rachel changed careers entirely, leaving nursing to become an advocate for fraud victims. Nicole struggled with anxiety and depression for months before finding stability through intensive therapy. Amanda focused on rebuilding her family unit while protecting her children from media attention. Sam used her experience to launch a blog about financial fraud prevention that gained national recognition. As for me, I rebuilt my life slowly and deliberately, focusing on creating stability for Sophia and Ryan, while processing my own trauma through counseling and legal advocacy work. The marketing career I had maintained part-time became a full-time commitment that provided financial independence and professional fulfillment beyond what I had experienced during my marriage. 3 years after discovering Mike's secret phone, I can reflect on the experience as simultaneously the most devastating and most empowering period of my life. Learning that everything I had believed about my marriage was built on lies forced me to reconstruct my understanding of trust, love, and personal strength in ways that ultimately made me more resilient and self-reliant. The children have adapted better than I initially feared, developing a mature understanding of how people can maintain public personas that differ dramatically from their private realities. They have learned lessons about trust and verification that will serve them well in their own future relationships, even though those lessons came at a terrible emotional cost. Mike remains in federal prison, where he will likely spend most of the next decade. He has attempted to contact me several times through letters and phone calls, seeking forgiveness or at least communication with his children. I have chosen not to respond to these overtures, believing that maintaining distance from his continued manipulation attempts is essential for our family's healing process. The house where we built our life together has been sold, the proceeds contributing to a trust fund for Sophia and Ryan's education. We live now in a smaller home that represents a fresh start, free from the memories and associations that would have made our previous residence a constant reminder of betrayal and deception. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Mike's gym bag hadn't been forgotten that Friday evening, if his secret phone had remained hidden for months or years longer. Would the truth have eventually emerged through other means, or could his elaborate deception have continued indefinitely? Would I have lived my entire life without knowing that my marriage was built on criminal fraud? These questions have no answers, but they remind me of the importance of trusting intuition when something feels wrong in a relationship. Several of the other wives had experienced anxiety and suspicion about Mike's behavior, but we had all dismissed these feelings as personal insecurities rather than warnings about genuine deception. Learning to value and investigate those instincts has become an important part of my personal growth. The story of Mike's elaborate fraud has been featured in documentaries, podcasts, and magazine articles that examine how modern technology enables sophisticated relationship deception. Our experience has become a cautionary tale about the importance of verification in romantic relationships and the warning signs that might indicate when someone is maintaining false identities. For other women who might find themselves in similar situations, I offer this advice. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't identify specific evidence of deception. Investigate financial irregularities, travel patterns, and communication habits that seem suspicious. Most importantly, remember that discovering the truth about a partner's deception, no matter how painful, is always preferable to living within elaborate lies that could collapse at any moment. The discovery of Mike's secret phone changed everything about my life, destroying the comfortable illusions I had maintained while forcing me to confront difficult truths about trust, love, and personal strength. While I would never choose to experience such betrayal again, I am grateful for the growth and resilience that emerged from surviving it. My children and I have built a new life that is smaller in scope, but more authentic in every way, free from the constant undercurrent of deception that had contaminated our previous existence. The federal investigation that followed Mike's disappearance revealed layers of criminal activity that none of us had imagined. Special Agent Maria Santos, the lead investigator assigned to the case, became a familiar presence in my life as she worked to unravel the complex web of identities, financial accounts, and fraudulent documentation Mike had created over more than a decade. Mrs. Martinez, what we're uncovering goes far beyond bigamy, Agent Santos explained during one of our many interviews at the FBI field office downtown. Your husband appears to have been running a sophisticated identity theft operation that serviced clients across multiple states. The financial records we've recovered suggest he generated over $2 million in illegal revenue during the past 5 years alone. The scope of Mike's criminal enterprise staggered me. Each new revelation forced me to reconsider memories and experiences from our marriage, searching for clues I might have missed, or explanations for behaviors I had attributed to his demanding work schedule. The man I had shared a bed with for 8 years had been operating a criminal organization while maintaining the facade of a devoted family man. Agent Santos showed me evidence of Mike's client network, a roster of individuals who had paid substantial fees for new identities, false documentation, and instruction on how to establish credit histories under assumed names. Some clients appeared to be people seeking fresh starts after financial difficulties, but others had criminal backgrounds that suggested Mike's services were being used for far more serious purposes than debt avoidance. We've identified at least 3 clients who used the identities your husband provided to commit additional crimes, Agent Santos continued. Bank fraud, tax evasion, and, in one case, identity theft targeting elderly victims. While we can't prove your husband knew about these subsequent crimes, his services made them possible. The realization that Mike's work had facilitated harm to innocent people added another dimension to my guilt and anger. Every dollar he had spent on our family expenses, every vacation he had funded, every gift he had given our children, had potentially been generated through criminal activity that hurt real victims. Our comfortable suburban lifestyle had been built on a foundation of systematic fraud that extended far beyond our personal situation. As the investigation progressed, Agent Santos kept me informed about the search for Mike, who had initially fled to Mexico but proved surprisingly difficult to locate, despite the resources federal agencies devoted to his capture. His expertise in creating false identities served him well as a fugitive, allowing him to disappear more completely than most criminals attempting to evade justice. He's been planning this escape route for years, Agent Santos admitted during one of our meetings. We found evidence of safe houses, hidden bank accounts, and false documentation prepared specifically for this type of emergency. Your husband understood that his criminal activities would eventually be discovered, and he invested heavily in preparing for that possibility. The systematic nature of Mike's escape preparations revealed how little our marriage had meant to him in practical terms. While I had been building a life based on love and commitment, he had been constructing exit strategies that would allow him to abandon everything and everyone if his crimes were exposed. The emotional investment I had believed we shared had been entirely one-sided, my genuine feelings met by calculated deception designed to maintain useful cover for his illegal operations. During this period, I maintained regular contact with Mike's other wives, who were dealing with their own versions of the investigative process, while trying to rebuild their lives around the absence of someone they had believed was their devoted partner. Ashley struggled with financial difficulties after losing access to the income Mike had provided, forcing her to sell the house they had shared and move into a smaller apartment. Rachel faced complications with the nursing license she had maintained under her married name, requiring legal assistance to separate her professional identity from Mike's criminal activities. Nicole's emotional recovery proved the most challenging among the group. Her anxiety and depression deepened as the full scope of Mike's deception became clear, requiring intensive therapy and medication to stabilize her mental health. The betrayal she had experienced had been so profound that she struggled to trust her own perceptions about other people and relationships, creating isolation that compounded her psychological difficulties. Amanda focused her energy on protecting her children from media attention and helping them process the loss of someone they had trusted as a father figure. The practical challenges of explaining Mike's absence without traumatizing children who had no responsibility for his crimes required careful coordination with child psychologists and school counselors who specialized in family trauma. Sam's response remained the most pragmatic among the group. She hired a private investigator to locate additional assets Mike might have hidden, pursuing financial recovery with the same determination she had applied to other challenges in her life. Her approach sometimes created tension within our informal support network, particularly when her efforts to claim shared property conflicted with similar claims from other wives. These conflicts highlighted the complex legal questions surrounding Mike's polygamous marriages and the distribution of assets acquired through criminal activity. Since none of his marriages after the first were legally valid, Ashley theoretically had stronger claims to shared property than the rest of us. However, the fact that much of his wealth had been generated through identity theft complicated any straightforward division of assets. 6 months after Mike's initial disappearance, Agent Santos called with news that the fugitive task force had located him in a small coastal town in Mexico, living under yet another false identity, and apparently planning to establish permanent residency outside U.S. jurisdiction. His capture required coordination between American and Mexican law enforcement agencies, a process complicated by the diplomatic protocols necessary for international extradition. He didn't surrender voluntarily, Agent Santos reported after Mike's arrest. Our sources indicate he was planning to move deeper into South America, possibly to a country without extradition treaties with the United States. We were fortunate to locate him before he could disappear completely. Mike's determination to avoid accountability even after his crimes had been fully exposed demonstrated the depth of his commitment to evading consequences for his actions. He had abandoned 5 wives and multiple children rather than accept responsibility for the harm his deception had caused, prioritizing his own freedom above the emotional and financial devastation he left behind. The extradition process took several additional months, during which Mike's defense attorneys attempted various legal maneuvers to prevent his return to the United States. They argued that the charges against him were politically motivated, that his fugitive status had been necessitated by media persecution rather than genuine legal jeopardy, and that extraditing him would violate his human rights under international law. These arguments failed to convince either Mexican or American courts, and Mike was eventually returned to Austin to face federal charges that had been expanded during his time as a fugitive. The additional evidence gathered during the investigation had revealed crimes beyond what prosecutors initially understood, including mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering charges related to his identity theft consulting operation. The trial that followed attracted national media attention as an example of how modern technology could enable elaborate personal fraud. Our stories became part of a larger narrative about relationship deception in the digital age, highlighting the vulnerability of people who trusted partners without adequate verification of their claims about identity and background. Testifying against Mike proved emotionally challenging but ultimately therapeutic. Having the opportunity to describe the impact of his deception in a formal legal setting validated the trauma we had experienced while creating an official record of the harm he had caused. The prosecutors who prepared our testimony were careful to focus on the criminal aspects of Mike's behavior rather than the personal relationship dynamics, helping us frame our experiences in terms of victimization rather than romantic failure. Mike's defense strategy centered on portraying his crimes as victimless offenses, motivated by love rather than greed. His attorneys argued that he had maintained multiple relationships because he genuinely cared for each woman involved, that his financial crimes were necessary to support the families he had created, and that his clients had been willing participants in identity changes that helped them escape legitimate financial difficulties. These arguments failed to resonate with the jury, who heard extensive testimony about the real victims of identity theft and the psychological trauma experienced by Mike's wives and children. The evidence of his elaborate escape planning and his decision to flee rather than accept responsibility undermined any claims that his motivations had been altruistic rather than selfish. The federal judge who presided over the case had extensive experience with complex financial crimes and was clearly unimpressed by Mike's attempts to minimize the severity of his actions. During sentencing, she delivered a statement that captured the frustration many of us felt about Mike's continued refusal to accept full responsibility for his choices. Mr. Martinez, you have systematically deceived multiple women who trusted you with their hearts, their futures, and their financial security, Judge Patricia Williams stated. You have facilitated identity theft that harmed innocent victims across multiple states. You have taught your own children that love and commitment are negotiable concepts that can be abandoned when maintaining them becomes inconvenient. The damage you have caused extends far beyond what can be measured in financial terms. The sentence Judge Williams imposed reflected the severity and scope of Mike's crimes. 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. followed by 5 years of supervised probation that would include restrictions on his access to financial services and technology. The financial penalties included forfeiture of all assets acquired through criminal activity, substantial fines, and restitution payments to identified victims of his identity theft operations. For our children, Mike's conviction and imprisonment created closure but also lasting questions about trust, family loyalty, and the nature of love itself. Sophia, now 15, struggled with anger toward her father that alternated with sadness about his absence from important events in her life. Ryan, approaching 13, seemed to adapt more easily, but occasionally asked profound questions about how people could maintain such elaborate lies while appearing to care genuinely about their families. The therapy sessions I arranged for both children helped them process their complex emotions while developing frameworks for understanding their father's behavior that didn't require them to either demonize or excuse his choices. Dr. Catherine Walsh, the family psychologist we worked with, emphasized that children could acknowledge both the love they had felt from their father and the harm his deception had caused without resolving the apparent contradiction between these experiences. Children are remarkably capable of holding complex emotions simultaneously, Dr. Walsh explained during one of our sessions. They can miss their father while being angry about his lies, feel grateful for positive memories, while recognizing that their family was built on deception. The goal isn't to resolve these contradictions, but to help them understand that people can be simultaneously caring and harmful, loving and dishonest. This therapeutic approach helped Sophia and Ryan develop emotional maturity beyond their years, while protecting them from the cynicism that might have resulted from a more black and white interpretation of their father's behavior. They learned to value authentic relationships while maintaining appropriate skepticism about people's claims and motivations, skills that would serve them well in their own future relationships. My own recovery from the trauma of discovering Mike's deception required professional help and personal commitment to rebuilding my capacity for trust. The marketing career I had maintained part-time during my marriage became a full-time focus that provided financial independence and professional fulfillment I had never experienced while depending on Mike's income. Working with fraud victims through various advocacy organizations became an unexpected passion that emerged from my own experience. The skills I had developed in marketing translated well to public education campaigns about relationship fraud, financial deception, and the warning signs that might indicate when romantic partners are maintaining false identities. 3 years after discovering Mike's secret phone, I was invited to speak at a federal law enforcement conference about the victim experience in complex relationship fraud cases. Standing before an audience of FBI agents, prosecutors, and victim advocates, I shared the lessons I had learned about recognizing deception, protecting personal assets, and rebuilding trust after systematic betrayal. The most important thing I want law enforcement professionals to understand, I told the conference audience, is that victims of this type of fraud aren't naive or stupid. We're people who made reasonable decisions based on carefully constructed lies. The perpetrators of these crimes are often highly skilled at emotional manipulation, using genuine human needs for connection and security as weapons against their victims. The response to my presentation was overwhelmingly positive, with several attendees asking me to develop educational materials that could be used in training programs for investigators and victim advocates. This work became a significant part of my life, providing meaning and purpose that emerged directly from the trauma Mike had caused. The other wives followed different paths toward recovery and rebuilding. Ashley eventually relocated to Austin permanently, finding comfort in the support network we had developed while pursuing a career in financial counseling that helped other fraud victims navigate the complex process of financial recovery. Her experience with Mike's deception had given her insights into how financial fraud operates that proved valuable in professional contexts. Rachel returned to nursing but specialized in psychiatric care, working with patients who had experienced various forms of trauma. Her own experience with systematic deception helped her understand and connect with patients whose trust had been violated by people they had believed cared about them. She eventually became a supervisor in a hospital psychiatric unit, where her combination of clinical skills and personal experience with betrayal made her exceptionally effective with difficult cases. Nicole struggled longest with her recovery but eventually found stability through a combination of therapy, medication, and gradual exposure to new social situations. She became an advocate for mental health resources for fraud victims, working with organizations that provided counseling and support services for people whose psychological well-being had been damaged by financial or relationship crimes. Amanda focused on rebuilding her family unit while protecting her children from ongoing trauma related to Mike's absence. She became involved in organizations that supported children who had lost parental figures through criminal activity, helping other families navigate the complex emotions that arise when someone children love is revealed to have been engaged in harmful behavior. Sam channeled her practical approach to recovery into launching a business that helped fraud victims recover stolen assets and rebuild their financial lives. Her company became successful enough to expand into multiple states, providing services that filled gaps in traditional legal and financial recovery systems. Her experience with Mike's elaborate financial deceptions gave her unique insights into how perpetrators hide assets and structure their operations to avoid detection. Our informal support network evolved into a formal organization that provided resources for victims of relationship fraud, particularly cases involving identity theft, bigamy, or other forms of systematic romantic deception. The Authentic Relationships Foundation, which we established with some of the recovered assets from Mike's criminal enterprise, became a resource for law enforcement agencies, victim advocates, and individuals who suspected they might be involved with deceptive partners. The Foundation's educational programs focused on teaching people how to verify information about romantic partners, recognize warning signs of deception, and protect themselves financially while building intimate relationships. We developed workshops for dating services, university campuses, and community organizations that provided practical guidance about relationship safety without promoting unhealthy cynicism about human connection. 5 years after Mike's conviction, I received a letter from him through his prison's correspondence system. It was the first communication I had accepted since his arrest, and I debated for weeks before deciding to read what he had written. The letter was lengthy and detailed, covering his experiences in federal prison and his reflections on the choices that had led to his incarceration. "I understand now that what I did wasn't love," Mike wrote. "I convinced myself that I could make everyone happy by giving each of you what you needed. But I realize now that real love requires honesty and sacrifice that I was never willing to provide. I stole years from your life and from our children's lives, and no amount of remorse can return what I took from all of you." His letter went on to describe therapy programs he had participated in while imprisoned, including group sessions with other inmates who had committed relationship and financial crimes. He had apparently gained insights into the psychological factors that had motivated his deception, though he acknowledged that understanding his behavior didn't excuse the harm he had caused. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for communication," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I did, and I spend every day thinking about how I could have been the husband and father you and the children deserved, instead of the criminal I chose to become." Reading Mike's letter provided a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. His acknowledgement of responsibility and his apparent understanding of the harm he had caused validated my experience while confirming that the decision to end our relationship had been correct. The man who wrote that letter seemed to have developed genuine remorse and self-awareness, but those insights had come far too late to salvage the relationships he had destroyed. I chose not to respond to Mike's letter, believing that maintaining distance from his attempts at redemption was healthier for my own recovery and my children's continued healing. Sophia and Ryan, now teenagers with mature perspectives on their father's behavior, supported my decision to maintain no contact, while leaving open the possibility that they might choose to communicate with him independently when they became adults. The house I purchased after selling our family home became a place of genuine peace and security, free from the undercurrents of deception that had contaminated our previous residence. Sophia and Ryan thrived in environments where they could trust that the adults in their lives were honest about their identities, their motivations, and their commitments to the family unit. 7 years after discovering Mike's secret phone, I was approached by a documentary producer who wanted to feature our story in a film about modern relationship fraud. The project would require extensive interviews with me and the other wives, as well as cooperation with law enforcement agencies and legal professionals who had worked on Mike's case. Participating in the documentary felt like an opportunity to share our experience with a broader audience, while contributing to public education about sophisticated relationship deception. The other wives agreed to participate, believing that our story could help other people recognize warning signs and protect themselves from similar crimes. The documentary, titled The Perfect Husband, A True Crime Story, premiered at several film festivals before being distributed through streaming platforms that reached millions of viewers worldwide. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many viewers sharing their own stories of relationship deception and expressing gratitude for the practical guidance our experiences provided. Educational institutions began incorporating our story into curricula about digital literacy, personal safety, and critical thinking in relationships. Law enforcement agencies used the documentary as training material for investigators working on complex fraud cases. Victim advocacy organizations found that our willingness to share difficult personal details helped other fraud victims feel less isolated and more willing to seek help and support. 10 years after the discovery that changed everything, I can reflect on the experience as simultaneously the most devastating and most transformative period of my life. Learning that my marriage was built on elaborate lies forced me to develop strength, independence, and wisdom I might never have discovered otherwise. The children who emerged from this trauma are more resilient, more discerning, and more appreciative of authentic relationships than they might have been without experiencing the consequences of deception firsthand. Mike remains in federal prison, where he has apparently become a mentor to other inmates and participates in educational programs that help incarcerated individuals develop legitimate job skills for their eventual release. Reports from prison staff suggest he has undergone genuine psychological change, though the transformation came too late to repair the relationships he destroyed through his choices. The work I do now through the Authentic Relationships Foundation provides meaning and purpose that emerge directly from personal trauma. Every person we help recognize deception, every family we assist in recovery from relationship fraud, every educational program we deliver represents transformation of pain into protection for others who might face similar challenges. My advice to anyone who discovers that their romantic partner has been maintaining false identities or elaborate deceptions is simple but profound. Trust your instincts, verify information independently, and remember that discovering painful truths is always preferable to living within beautiful lies. The process of rebuilding after systematic betrayal is difficult and lengthy, but it leads to authentic relationships and genuine self-knowledge that can never be taken away by someone else's deception. The red flags I wish I had recognized in my relationship with Mike include his secretiveness about financial details, his reluctance to fully integrate our social circles, his ability to compartmentalize different aspects of his life, and his skill at providing reasonable explanations for unusual circumstances. These warning signs might not indicate criminal activity in every case, but they suggest the need for additional verification and honest communication about concerns. Building new relationships after experiencing profound betrayal requires patience, therapy, and gradual development of trust, based on verified information rather than faith alone. The capacity for love and connection can be rebuilt after systematic deception, but it requires conscious effort to balance appropriate caution with openness to authentic human connection. Today, as I prepare dinner in a kitchen filled with laughter from children who have learned to value honesty above comfort, I am grateful for the strength that emerged from surviving Mike's betrayal. Our family is smaller than it once was, but more authentic in every way, built on foundations of truth that can withstand whatever challenges the future might bring. The secret phone that revealed everything about Mike's criminal enterprise now serves as a reminder in my jewelry box, a physical symbol of the importance of paying attention to details that don't align with the stories we want to believe about the people we love. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from the most painful revelations, and sometimes the greatest growth emerges from the deepest betrayals. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.